Well, good morning, everybody. Jeff Slakey and Spencer Hughes on the Daybreak Show. I've got two great guests, and the last time all three of us were together, it wasn't that long ago, but in the grand scheme of things, it was almost a lifetime ago. It's 35th District Representative Drew MacEwen, 35th District Representative Dan Griffey. Hey, guys, how you doing?
Wonderful. Thanks for having us.
I'm doing well, Jeff. Nice to talk to you.
Well, it's good to catch up with you guys. Good to know that you've been safe and healthy and continuing to do the people's work in the 35th. The last time we met was for a town hall, a forum, and we had talked about all sorts of different things and kind of a direction moving forward for not only the 35th, but the state. And right at the end of that town hall, I asked you guys what you thought of this coronavirus that at that time was really making waves in China, and we had started to see some of the cases in Washington. But since then, I mean, I can't imagine either of you guys could think about where we're at today.
No, it certainly, we knew it was an issue, certainly, but the magnitude that it took on, I think, took everybody by surprise. And then, needless to say, I mean, it was just a few weeks later, we started to see the impact on the economy locally, statewide, and on a national basis. And that was, I just, again, we knew it was out there, but I just don't think anyone really knew the magnitude that this was going to become, and that we'd be ground zero in Washington State because of the nursing home situation.
And we're still hearing those reports now and to the middle of June. I kind of want to pull on your guys's unique experience away from the legislature a little bit right now. Dan, as a first responder, a firefighter, talk to me a little bit about how the first responders, not only in the 35th, but across the state, have really kind of stepped up to this challenge. And what have you been hearing from them?
Well, Jeff, we were just like everyone else. We couldn't find enough PPE, so we had to really look high and low and under some rocks, and we found N100 masks. They're a lot better masks. They have cartridge filters. They're easier to breathe. We're hearing a lot of people that have respiratory problems having to wear these masks. So what we wanted to do is make sure that we got masks that would protect our first responders the best, and N100s would do it. N100 is basically 100%. N95 is 95% filtration, which is good enough. So that was the first thing that we had to do, is we had to figure out how we're going to keep our people safe when we couldn't even find masks. I'm happy to say that my local fire department was able to find 6 ventilators. So
And again, we're connecting with Dan over the phone line here, and so we may come in and out.
It is quite a bit lower.
No, go ahead, Dan. We dropped you out for a second there. You were mentioning the ventilators.
Yeah, so our jurisdiction was able to get 6 ventilators. They were easier to get than the respirators. So your fire department has state-of-the-art equipment for all respiratory emergencies. We also were able to purchase CPR machines, and the survivability rate with this type of CPR is quite a lot higher. So we've done a lot of good things in a quick hurry to be prepared for this.
And then, Drew, with your background in finances in the financial world here, it has just put everything on its heels, it seems like. And every day we will see reports, and I was interviewing Ted Jackson from United Way about this a little bit, and they've got some new snapshots and reports. And well, these are all snapshots in time. And while it's important contextually to understand this, one day you'll see, oh my gosh, retail spending in May was up 17%. It's the largest increase ever, but how we got there, we had to really struggle to be able to show those gains.
Yeah.
What's the financial market like?
Yeah, my world is on fire, for these, during this. And, as an investment manager and a partner in a couple of restaurants, everything was certainly impacted. And you look at the overall economic picture of things, we know what happened with the market. It sold off horribly in the first quarter and going into the second quarter even. And there was a complete uncertainty about how this would play out. And then as the stimulus program was rolled out and the unemployment added benefits were rolled out, things start to stabilize out. And what we've actually seen, and whether it's anecdotally or statistically on a nationwide basis, is there was that uncertainty was prevalent in March, and then again, as those programs got rolled out, it injected some stability, and people were. There's people that were not benefiting from that, and I don't want to minimize that at all. There's some people that have gone through some horrible financial struggles through this whole thing. But by and large, a vast majority of people who either were business owners or employees, whether they lost their job or not, a lot of people were able to find some stability through the programs that were out there. And what we saw then is, as April stabilized out, as you said, May, we saw this largest increase ever in retail spending. But put that into context, I mean, that's like getting slaughtered by the New England Patriots 49-3. And then the next time you lose 40-9. Well, yeah, you had an increase of 200% in your scoring. Well, big deal. I mean, you're coming from zero to something. But I think by and large, we have seen things stabilize out. But our state, we've been compounded by the unemployment fraud issue that's going on. That has directly impacted a number of people, where it's delayed them being able to get payments, et cetera. And what we're now seeing too with the added unemployment benefit ends July 1st. That's that additional $600 that the federal government instituted. We're in a precarious situation right now when you combine that with the Paycheck Protection Program that a lot of existing businesses took part in, that we're not at a point where you can really ramp up with your employees yet, because depending on what sector you're in and what county you're in and what phase you're in, you might be at 25%, you might be going to 50%, but you still might not even be open. And so I think we're gonna, this next month or so will be a key here in how we've responded and how much of the economy is open, and hopefully a fair amount, because again, these are people's livelihoods on the line. So I think we were able to bridge the gap there in the short term, but we're coming up on the major bridge.
Something about the 35th that I noticed, and I know that county by county, it's a little unique. In the south part of Kitsap County, there obviously have been some cases and deaths like that. In Thurston County, which is the tail end of the 35th, there's been the same. But for whatever reason, within Mason County, the total number of cases is, as of this morning, right around 40. There has been, unfortunate for the family, but overall one death because of this, and the active cases can be counted on one hand. What do you think it is about the 35th, Dan, start with you, or Mason County, that has allowed itself or helped itself to be not as big of an epicenter as the surrounding counties? And Dan, if you're not able to pick that up, Drew, you have an answer on that one?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is our rural way of life here, and so by definition, we don't have as much of the mass interaction that we have or we see in other counties. That, and I think when you look at our demographics of our county, we have a large, and I don't know what the exact number is, but a large percentage that are retired, are no longer in the workforce, and so I think when you kind of look at those two factors, a smaller population in a very frankly large geographic area, and a lot that aren't routinely in the workforce, the interaction there was easy to minimize, and thus minimize the spread of the virus. So I think that's a large component to it, primarily. And yeah, you look at Kitsap, you have a large numbers there that commute to the Seattle metro area. You also have a large number that work in the shipyard, including folks from Mason that commute there. But one of the things that the shipyard done, I mean, they've been an example of how to frankly stay in business. I mean, they're obviously a little bit different. They're a government run facility, but they found ways. I have a good friend of mine that I served with in the Navy. He's a civilian worker now for the Navy, and they found a number of ways, even for them, where you're working on ships to and doing refits on them, to be able to do a lot of work from home. A lot of your pre-planning. There's a ton of permits that are involved, and a lot of checkouts that are involved when you do maintenance on ships and submarines. They're able to find ways to do a lot of that remotely, and so they found a great way to navigate through that. And then, you look at Thurston, again, a larger population center, but the state government, by large part, put everybody on remote working. So that was a factor there as well. So I think, though, it's fortunate in Mason that we've had a minimal spread of this, and that's good. And hopefully we can maintain it that way. And I think, ironically, I think this goes to show why having a rural economy is important.
Yeah.
And because we often, I think, get overlooked in the in the legislature.
Dan, let's bring you back in and start talking about this next session that you guys are going to face, and it is going to be a big uphill struggle. We know that cities and counties and the state, you can't run deficits. The feds, on the other hand, can. What are you guys looking to help not massive cuts across the board in state government?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Jeff. And I think what you have to do is go back to priorities of government-based decision-making. And those services that we have in Washington State that matter the most to people have to be prioritized and have to be funded to the best extent. Drew and I both have called to go back into session to stop the bleeding now, because we believe if we stop the bleeding now, we will have less cut talks when session starts, and we'll have more money to deal with. So I think we have to go back to priorities of the government model to determine where we're going to make cuts or where we're going to make adjustments.
If I'm not mistaken, we had seen some pretty high revenue ideals that were coming in the rainy day fund. I know that was something you guys were talking about, making sure that we held on to that. Do you know where we're at with that rainy day fund, or how much do we have available in savings? I know, Drew, you work closely on these numbers.
Yeah, I'm the assistant ranking on appropriations, and so we have approximately $4 billion, give or take, in the rainy day fund. We also had an ending fund balance in the budget, which really amounted to zero. It was about $100 million, but on a $54 billion budget, that's not a lot of money. So where we're at right now, there was some initial work done by the Economic Forecast Council in May, projecting roughly a $17 billion hole over the next 4 years. I mean, that's huge. And you can't fill that with the rainy day fund. So, and you also don't want to decimate the rainy day fund because other things can happen. We've used it in the past couple of years for wildfires. So other things happen, and you've got to always have some reserves. So we shortly here in the next few days, we'll get the June forecast. I think that's going to shed a better light on what we're really looking at, both in the near term and in the coming 4 years. And until we see that, it's hard to speculate what has to be done. Dan's right. We've got to go back to the priorities of government. I've voted against the last few budgets. I've spoken about this on the House floor. We were spending way too much money. We were due for an economic downturn. Nobody saw COVID coming, but we were due in the economic cycle to have a recession. And the legislature continued just to spend and not really putting anything aside. And guess what? That's come home to roost now. So, and unfortunately, you have a lot of programs that are either entitlement or require spending to meet federal matching funds. So you're left with very little that you can cut. And oftentimes the things that get thrown about cutting are the very programs that are most needed in a recessionary time. So we're going to have our work cut out for us, certainly. And again, it's hard to speculate on how that's exactly going to look until we see those numbers. Hopefully, the economy, we're seeing a sharp uptick, as we talked about before, and hopefully that trajectory continues, and that'll help weather us through that. But we'll need more data to really be able to determine that.
Back on the COVID, Dan, how are you feeling about these different phases of reopening? Do you think it's too fast, too slow? Should it be more county up to the county commissioners and the folks in the Department of Health, things like that?
It should be real on the ground statistics. Mason County should have been allowed to open earlier. You know, we're at 39 now, and they keep having to really look back in the contact tracing to find more. And the counties that are not seeing the numbers that we did see up in King County and Snohomish County, what we really should be doing is encouraging people to be safe, keep their distances, wash their hands, cover if you're sick. Those kind of things work, but we should really have been allowed to open a little sooner. I think we've been way too rigid. There were less restrictive alternatives that we've been asking the governor to look at to make sure that our economy didn't get so trampled, and then to really understand that people need to get back to work, and that we need to get Washington moving again. In some cases, in most cases, I think we're moving way too slow. And I think we can move faster and not see huge spikes. You know, we did all of these, we took all of these precautions to make sure that our healthcare system wasn't flooded. Well, I'll tell you, for the first 3 weeks of the lockdown, we saw half the number of calls that we normally see. And then what we started seeing at week 4 and week 5, we started seeing people that have been neglecting their dialysis and all of their treatments that they should be doing every day to stay healthy. We started seeing really, really, really sick patients because there was so much out there saying, don't go to the hospital, you're going to get sick. People were too scared, and they actually made themselves more sick. So I think we can move a little faster than we're going now. I think Mason County should have moved a lot faster.
And again, that all ties into the economic numbers. Since we
Yep.
have income tax here in Washington, it's all sales, and if nobody's out shopping, that's going to put the right in that budget there with you guys, Drew, to make it easy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Jeff, what's interesting too through all this is you come to find out every county was required prior to all this to have a flu pandemic plan. And so every county already had a set of governing documents and pathway to navigate through having a flu pandemic. And that should have really been what was used from the get-go. On a bipartisan basis, we supported the initial emergency proclamation, the stay-at-home order, those initial 2 weeks. I think it helped to set the tone in the state, and that, hey, this is serious. We've got to minimize interactions, and I think that was a good thing. Not even say probably the initial 4 weeks, but right in that period there, towards the end of that 4th week, we should have been migrating to using these county plans. And because what's happening here, as we talked about before, is vastly different than what's happening in Seattle and Tacoma. And I think that would have had a much more positive impact on the economic numbers, while also maintaining a healthy way to conduct our daily lives and not overwhelm the system. So it's disappointing that wasn't utilized. In fact, we're still under an emergency proclamation. And as you know, I've got a federal lawsuit regarding that issue. I think we cannot continue to govern where one person is setting the rules for every industry and for the healthcare system, on an ongoing, indefinite basis.
In the midst of all this, of course, too, now we're seeing across the country protests that sometimes have turned into riot situations regarding the treatment to African Americans across the country. We've had protests. There's that Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone up in Seattle. We've had some peaceful protests in Shelton and Belfair. How much of this that is happening now will push through into the legislature, and are you anticipating major legislation on either side of the aisle on either police reform or things like that? Either of you?
Well, I think go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
I'm on public safety, and I can say Washington State needs to at least be recognized for all the work we've already done. On the Public Safety Committee, I sat on the Police Use of Deadly Force Task Force, which brought both sides together. It was a beautiful thing. You saw two diametrically opposed groups that came together in friendship and changed the law and removed malice as as something a prosecutor has to show for when the police charge a law officer for the use of deadly force. And the other thing that we did is we've increased our training at the Criminal Justice Training Center for diversity, ethnic diversity, by a lot. And then last year, we also passed a law that requires all use of force be put into a centralized database so we can more accurately determine the pathway to chart. So I think Washington's way ahead. So are we going to see huge law change? I don't think so. I think we're going to implement the plans that we've already voted on, and we're ahead of the nation on.
Well, I think that what we'll see, and whether it's in a special session or in the regular session in January, I think there's going to be some very progressive proposals put forward. I mean, we're seeing this movement right now, the defund the police, which police morale is at rock bottom right now. But let's backtrack for a second. What happened to George Floyd was murder. It's atrocious, and that guy should have never been a police officer. After, when you look at his record, that scenario, that should have never ever happened. Period. And it is unacceptable. And I totally support and understand those that have protested, whether it was in Minnesota or elsewhere in the nation, including here. I understand that, and I support those protests and bringing light to racial inequalities that we have in this nation, and that's something that we've got to continue in that to figure out. And we're not going to be able to legislate hatred being gone. We just can't. If it was that easy, we would have solved this years ago. But I think first and foremost, as an institution in the legislature, we need to serve as an example, as a body. That and that's the best thing you can do in any walk of life, is just be the example of what we should be in this world. When it comes to the police, it's unfortunate when you look at the rioters and the looting, because they take away from the message of what really is the true message here, and what happened with Mr. Floyd, and those people I just do not have much regard for. That they've taken away from those that have chosen a peaceful means to address the situation. So we have to have the dialogue in this nation. We're not going to solve it in Olympia, and we're not going to solve it in Washington D.C. either. We as a society have just got to do better in our daily lives, and let's be that positive light we all seek to be.
What does that mean to you guys, defund the police? What does that mean?
Well, what I've read on that is that it's this movement to take away a vast amount of money from police departments, including the number of officers, the gear that they have, and to go to community outreach programs. I've got a good friend in the Seattle Police Department. I've got good friends in other police departments in the Puget Sound area. Morale's at a rock bottom. And if you move to that type of a program, you know what's going to happen. Your good officers, they're going to go to other agencies and other jurisdictions, and whether that's within the state or elsewhere in the nation. And you know what you're going to be left with are the not so good ones. We've already seen in Seattle a dramatic increase in response time because of some of those things going on. I'll tell you what, a community officer isn't going to be able to respond to a violent domestic dispute when it takes 20, 30 minutes for a regular officer to get there right now. I think I think that movement is misguided and is not the solution or the crux of what the overall issue is here.
Dan?
Yeah, my understanding is similar to Drew's understanding, is take part of the law enforcement budget, improve conditions on the ground, and then hopefully what you then do is improve socioeconomic conditions, and then crime goes down. That sounds good on paper, and I want to do that. We have a lot of efforts going that way in Washington State around mental health and substance abuse. I personally support changing, what in crisis means on our streets. Somebody that's always high on drugs and alcohol on our streets, we can do better for them. And so some of those things sound positive, but we still have to, as Drew said, be able to have quick response to domestic assault to murderous intentions, breaking and entering. There's a lot of things that we have to have robust police presence and police response for. So I think it's misguided to say that we have to do one without the other. I think we can do community improvements. We can fix the mental health response and the substance response. We can have more options for housing. We can work towards both of those, reforming police without defunding them, giving them more resources, community policing, where that we embed social workers with our law enforcement. I know Chief Moody in the city of Shelton has been trying to get that off the ground. We've been talking about different grants that we've set up. We would like to get embedded social workers so they can be proactive policing on those issues. But we still have to have a robust police force to go to the violent crime responses.
Well, this upcoming session is the long session, right? You guys have the
Yep.
full time. So there's going to be a lot of things to work on here through this. And we're only in the middle of June. The situation changes almost daily. We do appreciate the time that you're able to spend with me here talking about all this stuff. Constituents in the 35th that need to reach out and have issues regarding anything, unemployment insurance, the fraud there, if their names, they can contact your guys' office and your
Absolutely.
assistants, and you guys can do whatever work you can.
Absolutely. And we both have very able assistants as well that, we've seen, the calls and the emails we've gotten just on the unemployment issue is just through the roof.
Yeah.
And as we know, there's major issues going on there. So absolutely. But if you're having an issue, whether it's unemployment or something else, if you're having an issue with something happening smoothly with state government, reach out to our offices. That's why we're there, and to help guide through that.
Yeah, I'll put the links to your guys' websites in the show notes.
Great.
On this one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a side note, I was a victim of that through my fire jurisdiction. Somebody had been collecting almost 3 months in my name, and it took L&I that long to notify my jurisdiction that somebody was collecting fraudulently in my name. So I was one of the many victims that you see in Washington State.
So Dan, tell me about what you have done to help, clear your name on that one.
Well, it's tough. First, you got to file a report with unemployment, a fraudulent report. You have to file a report with local law enforcement. So because I work in Mason County, I file with the Mason County Sheriff's Department. I had to file with all 3 credit bureaus that there was fraudulent use of my unemployment, and then had to file a report with Social Security Administration in case my Social Security number was used fraudulently. And so now I have 3 credit bureaus monitoring all of my credit, and every time there's a hit to my credit, I get a notification. And we're currently refinancing our house, and that kind of put the refinance into a tough spot. Wow. Because they kind of lock up all of your credit when you do that. And so we had to jump through some hoops on that. So I'm suffering along with the rest of my constituents that are suffering the same thing. But I tell them, go to the employment security website, get the checklist, and follow the checklist. It's the best way to keep yourself safe.
Dan Griffey and Drew MacEwen, 35th District Representatives, and representing the 35th well. It was nice to talk and catch up with you guys, and let's do this in a couple months again and see where we're at.
Sounds good. Likewise. Thanks for having us, Jeff.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.